If you're planning for retirement or if you're already in it, then one of the biggest questions that comes up is, should I be doing Roth conversions? I mean, this is talked about everywhere. I mean, there's videos made about it, like this one right here. There's articles written about it. It's a subject that gets a lot of attention. And, the reason that this topic gets so much attention is because on the plus side, if you do well-timed conversions, it could reduce your future RMDs. It could lower your lifetime taxes. It could possibly reduce the chance of getting hit by those Medicare IRMAA surcharges. It could also possibly allow you to keep more of your Social Security because then maybe less of it will be subject to tax in the future. And it can also make things far easier for the surviving spouse or for your kids. I mean, there's a lot of things on the plus side, so to speak. Now, on the negative side, if you do a poorly timed conversion, it could increase your taxes unnecessarily. It could cause you to lose those ACA premium credits. It could also push you into IRMAA. And it could also create tax that you never needed to pay at all. The thing is, when it comes to Roth conversions, I've certainly have seen couples that have reduced their projected lifetime taxes by sometimes 5, maybe even 6 figures over the course of their lifetime because they converted in the right years, the right amount, the right time, all those things. But on the flip side, I've also met with people that they converted far too much too fast. They hear about Roth conversions, how great it is to have tax-free money in the future. And they went ahead and they just did too much and they paid a large tax bill. And then they later discovered that they really didn't actually need to convert at all in their situation. Each person's situation is different. And so today, what I want to do is walk you through and kind of talk about some of the groups that maybe should be considering converting, and then some of the groups that maybe should not be considering converting and talk through how that works. So what we'll cover is we're going to talk about the low income window, where some people can convert at the 0 to 12% bracket, and some people find themselves in this bracket when they retire, even if they've been high income earners throughout their working years. So we'll talk about that. We'll also talk about retirees that have large IRA balances who will face future RMD pressure. We'll talk about why surviving spouses often face higher taxes than married couples. We'll also talk about how Social Security and IRMAA fit into the picture. We'll talk about when QCDs change the math completely. And we'll talk about how the Secure Act affects your kids, and then also why your future tax bracket is really the key question here. Now, I will say this up front. We won't cover every little nuance as it relates to Roth conversions, but I do hope that this provides a good overview for you to help make some better decisions and understand some of the key things that you need to be thinking about when deciding whether to convert or not to convert. So let's go ahead and get into it here. Let's start with group one. In group one, these are the newly retired households with very low taxable income. So again, you could have been a high income earner throughout your working years, but after you retire, you might find yourself, if you're in this group, to be in a situation where now your income's really low because the paycheck has stopped. You haven't turned on your Social Security yet. You're not getting a pension, perhaps, or if you are, it's a very small pension, but you're not receiving RMDs. Maybe you're still in your 60s or something and retired. And of course, RMDs don't begin until your 70s. At this point, you might be in a situation where you're just living off the money that's in your checking account, maybe the money that's in your savings or in CDs, just kind of money at the bank. You also might just be taking withdrawals from a brokerage account and, keeping in mind that the basis that you withdraw is not taxable. You also, might be taking very small withdrawals from your IRA or maybe from a small pension. Okay. So if you're in this type of situation, this group one, these households often have very low MAGI, modified adjusted gross income, right? Even though you might still have plenty of spending money. Keep in mind that cash flow doesn't equal taxable income. And so let me give you an example. So this is a married couple filing jointly. They're living on their savings, plus they're taking withdrawals from their brokerage account, and much of it is basis. And so let's say that they have long-term capital gains of $30,000. It doesn't matter too much, but just kind of want to make that a low amount. They're also not receiving Social Security yet. They have no RMDs required yet, but let's say they withdraw $16,700 from their IRA in which to live on. Now, let's also assume that they're both 65 and that they take the standard deduction. Now, in 2025, the standard deduction for married filing jointly is $34,700. And since they're 65, they will also each get the new $6,000 so-called senior deduction. So between the standard deduction and each getting the new senior deduction, that's $46,700. So in this situation, they could convert tens of thousands of dollars at the 10% or even the 12% bracket. And by the way, everything I'm talking about here today is federal. I'm not talking about state tax at all. So, because every state's different. And some states don't have state tax. So now this said, though, if they are going to convert up to the 10% or maybe through, all the way up until the 12% tax bracket, they would just want to be very careful about their long-term capital gains. So I put that in there as something, something else that we want to be considering, because keep in mind that your long-term capital gains stack on top of your ordinary income. So if their income gets to a certain limit, then their long-term capital gains would then start to become taxable. They could even just convert up to the amount that their deductions offset their income and then not owe any federal tax at all. So in their case, remember they were withdrawing $16,700, so they could actually do a conversion of $30,000 and not have to pay any tax on that Roth conversion. I mean, that's a no-brainer. I mean, that's a big win for sure. So think at this time period that I'm talking about here, if it will apply to you, is really a golden window. I mean, the years when your tax rate may be lower than any future year of your life. And, as a side note, this is one of the benefits to being tax diversified, so to speak, meaning that you have money in pre-tax accounts. You have money maybe in Roth accounts and also a brokerage account. Because if all of your money is in pre-tax, you lose a lot of this flexibility. Now, let me talk about one caution here. So if you're under 65 and you're on an ACA plan, number one, if you're under 65, you won't have those $6,000 senior deductions I was talking about, and the standard deduction would be a little bit less. But the caution also that I want to mention here is that if you're under 65 and on an ACA plan, you need to factor in the ACA subsidies. So for 2025, the subsidy phases out gradually, but in 2026, and I'm recording this in November of 2025, so I know 2026 is right around the corner here. And in 2026, I mean, unless Congress changes the law between now and then, the system's going to revert back to more of a cliff-based system. Now, a Roth conversion could, if you were to do a Roth conversion, it could suddenly wipe out that large ACA premium credit. So you need to be aware, if you're going to do that Roth conversion, you need to know what the full ramifications of that could be. So, in other words, in this situation, number one is what income tax might I have to pay, federal and then also state? And then also in this case, might I lose my ACA premium credits as an example? For someone on the ACA, you just have to run the numbers carefully and make sure that you're comparing the benefits of doing a Roth conversion and the benefits of doing that versus the subsidies that you may lose. And by the way, I'm not saying that it doesn't make sense for some people to maybe go ahead and do that Roth conversion, even if you're going to lose out on some of the subsidies or maybe even all the subsidies. It's one of those things you just have to run the numbers and see what makes most sense for you and your situation. Now, another important point here, if you're under 59 and a half, you must pay the tax with money that's outside the IRA when you do the conversion, any tax that you owe there. So if you withhold from the IRA itself, you're going to trigger the 10% penalty on the amount that you withheld. So you need to be aware of that, again, if you're under 59 and a half. Now, let's move on to group two. So group two, these are the retirees that have large traditional IRA balances. And so as a result, we'll maybe feel that RMD pressure later on, which all depends really on how much you want to spend once you have to take your RMDs. And the reason that I say that is because if your RMD is $100,000 and you only want to withdraw really $50,000, well, then you're having to withdraw $50,000 more than you actually want to. But if you want to spend $100,000 and your RMD is $100,000, or if you want to withdraw $100,000, your RMD is $100,000, then it may not be an issue for you in your situation. So just kind of something else to keep in mind. It doesn't say, it's not to say that converting wouldn't make sense earlier, but what we're really talking about here are those situations where, again, the RMD that you have to take out is even more than you would actually want in order to spend. Because, if you think about it, if you're entering your 60s, and let's say that you've got $1 million, maybe $1.5 million, maybe $2 million, whatever it is. And, all that money is in pre-tax accounts like IRAs or 401ks, then your future RMD could certainly grow quickly, especially if your investments do well and if you're not withdrawing much or not withdrawing any, perhaps, from these accounts for income. So, if your accounts are doing well, you're not withdrawing much for income or even at all, then you fast forward to when you have to take your RMDs, which is age 73 if you were born before 1960, and it's age 75 is when you have to start if you were born in 1960 or later. For this group, doing a well-timed conversion or conversions really, at the right time, the right amount, it can help with all those good things potentially, right? It might help to reduce your future RMDs. It might help to reduce your future taxable income, help to potentially lower IRMAA risk, right? All of these things. But really, at the core, what this is all about is it's simply about helping to put you in a position where you hopefully won't have to take forced withdrawals later on at a higher tax rate. Because again, maybe your RMD is 100 grand, you only need 50. Well, now you got to just withdraw that extra $50,000, even though you didn't need or want that. Now you got to pay taxes unnecessarily. It might affect IRMAA, right? All of those things. All right, so let's get into group three here. So I'm calling group three, these are the married couples planning ahead for the surviving spouse. The reason that I have this on here is because I find this gets overlooked quite often, unfortunately. It's important when planning for retirement, if you're a couple and you're in your 60s, that you're planning for a long life, to make sure that you have all the income, the money, the money that you'll want and the income that you'll need and want over the course of your retirement. You're making good decisions from a tax standpoint, your withdrawal strategy, and all of these things. All of that is important. And sometimes I see people planning for that and things might look okay, but then we also need to take a look at something we don't want to think about, and that is if one spouse were to pass away, especially early in retirement. What's the impact there on that surviving spouse? I mean, that number one, or as a side note, maybe I should say, is that when it comes to Social Security, you're going to lose that lower Social Security check. So you've lost that income. And then from a tax standpoint, really what we're focused on here is that you're going to, if you're taking the standard deduction, that now gets cut in half for single folks. And also, if you were getting the senior deduction, the extra $6,000, which is for age 65 plus, if you qualify, if depending upon your income, well, now you only get one of those, $6,000 deductions. And also the tax brackets are compressed. If you look at it, for a married couple filing jointly versus single folks, the brackets are much more compressed for a single person. And I've seen situations where sometimes a single individual will actually have to pay more in taxes than they, even though they're living on one less Social Security check than they were when they were married. So that's important to consider. I mean, again, not only will the single person potentially pay higher taxes. But also, what can happen is that a higher percentage of your Social Security could be subject to tax, even though again you only have one Social Security benefit. And so this is all going to depend kind of where you fall on the income scale and where that income comes from. Now, with the higher income levels, it can also affect IRMAA and maybe even not, real high income levels. Because keep in mind, with IRMAA, to get into that first bracket, it hits at just over 200,000. Okay, now it's adjusted a little bit every year, but just call it just over 200,000. But if you're single, well, then it's just over 100,000. So if you were married and your income was, $140,000, and that was your Maggie, and now you lost a Social Security check, so okay, now it's a little bit less, but you're still over the IRMAA threshold, perhaps. Well, now you're paying a little bit more for that, and that's not the end of the world, paying the extra. No one wants to pay more, but again, it's not the end of the world, but it is something to consider as well. Now, in this situation, the reason that Roth conversions could help is that if you convert while both spouses are alive, then you use wider tax brackets. And you also use the two age 65 plus deductions if applicable. And you reduce the IRA that the surviving spouse will later inherit. And also, of course, you reduce the future RMDs that could push them into a higher tax bracket. And this is especially important if one spouse is significantly older than the other. One spouse may have known health concerns, and so life expectancy might be much shorter. All right, now let's talk about group 4. So group 4, I'm calling this the when conversions help your kids category. So here's the deal, right? Because of the Secure Act, most non-spouse beneficiaries must empty an inherited IRA within 10 years. And those withdrawals are taxable. So, if your kids are already high income, or perhaps they're in their peak earning years when they inherit the money, maybe they're in a dual career household, meaning both your child and your spouse are both working. So maybe their income's even higher. Maybe they're in a situation where already their tax bracket is at 32% or 35 or even 37%. And so now when they inherit this money, they're already at that higher tax bracket. And so now they're going to have to pay even more tax now at this money. And again, I'm just talking about federal. They might also have state tax that they'll have to worry about. So in some situations, you may decide it might make sense that you would like to go ahead and convert, even if it may not meaningfully help you in your situation. For example, you might have to pay tax at, call it the 22% tax rate, just as an example. But you also know that maybe in the future, you would likely still be in the 22% tax bracket. And maybe after all the analysis, looking at IRMAA and Social Security taxation, right, all of these different things, you might decide, that there's really no meaningful advantage for me. I'm not going to have forced RMD or anything like this. I need to be worried about. But this could meaningfully help my kids, and I would like to go ahead and pay the tax to do the conversion. So this really depends on your values. Some parents I talk to really want to do everything that they can and can financially afford it. And, again, it's just something they want to do, that they want to make sure that they can pass along as much money to their kids after taxes. Others tell me, hey, my retirement comes first. It's my money. I've earned it. I work for it. All those good things. I need to make sure that I'm okay. My kids are okay, and they'll be my beneficiaries, but they'll get whatever's left. There's really no right or wrong answer here. The role, though, of doing any conversions for this purpose, it simply depends on what matters most to you. All right, so those are some of the situations, some of the reasons and things why you definitely might want to consider converting. But now let's also talk about the flip side of this. So let's get into some of the reasons and situations and such why you might not want to convert. And so the first one to look at here, or that we're going to look at, is retirees that plan to use QCDs. So this can be a big win if you're wanting to give to charity. So that's a big if, though. You have to be charitably inclined for this one. So at age 70 and a half, you can donate directly from your IRA using a QCD, which is a qualified charitable distribution. Now in 2025, the maximum QCD limit is 108,000 a year. And in 2026, the maximum limit will be 111,000 for that year. And this is per person, by the way. So let's say, just as an example, let's say that your RMD is $70,000. Now, maybe you only need $40,000, and maybe that extra $30,000 that you have to take out that you don't actually need or don't actually want, you might then have to pay, taxes now as a result. You might also be in a situation where maybe you're in a higher tax bracket, so maybe you're paying even more. Maybe you're in a situation where it might cause you to pay more tax on your Social Security benefits. This can be a big win, again, if you're charitably inclined to begin with. But just be careful here, though, because the RMD rules can be a little tricky. So the key thing here is that to know is that the first dollars that you withdraw go to satisfy your RMD. So if you've already taken out your $70,000 for the year to satisfy your RMD, and now you're thinking about doing a QCD, well, the amount you take now to do that QCD, it's not going to reduce your RMD. So as an example, let's say that you withdrew $70,000 to satisfy your RMD, and now you want to do $20,000, let's say, as a QCD. You can, but this will be an additional distribution. Now, I highly recommend that you do a QCD first before taking any other portion of your RMD for the year if your goal is to use the QCD to satisfy either some or all of the RMD and exclude that amount from your taxable income. Now, the key, or a key thing anyways to be thinking about here, is that if you're wanting to do QCDs in the future and you're thinking about doing Roth conversions, and maybe you're now in your 60s, let's just say, is that you really want to be thinking through, if I'm going to do this Roth conversion, again, does it make sense? Or if I'm going to be, donating this to charity in the future by doing a QCD, well, maybe I shouldn't do that Roth conversion now, because then I might be paying taxes on this money unnecessarily that I was just going to be donating to charity anyways. All right, now let's talk about group two of the people or situations or reasons why you might not want to convert. And so I'm calling this the households with very low lifetime income. So some retirees will just naturally remain in low tax brackets in retirement. We'll have low RMDs, maybe Social Security is largely not taxed or maybe not even taxed. Maybe there's no realistic chance of having, really having to worry about IRMAA. Just as an example, a married couple over the age of 65 that's receiving $60,000 of Social Security, withdrawing $25,000 from an IRA, and let's just say for fun, they're also withdrawing $10,000 from a Roth. Well, they'd be living on $95,000 a year, but they wouldn't have to pay any federal income tax at all. Why is that? Well, first of all, the Roth isn't taxable. And if the only income that they had was Social Security, well, they wouldn't have any federal income tax to worry about. It's the additional $25,000 IRA withdrawal, which will cause some of their Social Security to become subject to tax. So, and to determine how much in their case, what you need to do is you got to add that $25,000 withdrawal plus 1/2 of their Social Security, which is 1/2 of their Social Security is $30,000. So that's $55,000 of provisional income. You then have to apply that to the thresholds, which I'm not going to get into here because I've gotten into that in more detail in other videos as to exactly how that calculation works. But, just for now, know that the numbers work out to be $15,350 of their Social Security is subject to tax. And so if you add this amount plus the $25,000 IRA withdrawal, you'll get $40,350 of taxable income. However, they each get the larger, or they get that larger standard deduction because they're married filing jointly. And also because they're over 65 and qualify income-wise, they each get the extra $6,000 senior deduction. So again, these folks wouldn't have to pay any federal tax at all. Now, let's move on to the third section. So this is anyone whose conversion would end up triggering an ACA cliff. So in 2026, unless legislation changes it, the ACA subsidies are going to revert to a system where if you cross certain income thresholds, it can eliminate the premium credits entirely. So a Roth conversion that pushes income a little too high could wipe out thousands of dollars of subsidies. And this could certainly erase any benefit of converting. So again, not saying you shouldn't convert, but you have to weigh the pros and cons of all these decisions here. All right, so we've covered a lot. We've talked about some of the reasons why you might want to convert, or situations and such why you might want to convert, and some of the situations and reasons why you might not. And I've talked about some different things, and I want to go into a little bit more detail on some of this in case you're not familiar with some of these things. So like, for instance, one of these things is IRMAA. So if you're not familiar with what IRMAA is, number one, Medicare IRMAA is based upon your MAGI. And so for 2025, the first IRMAA threshold is $106,000 for single filers and $212,000 for married couples filing jointly. And if you cross that threshold by even $1, it could then raise your Part B and Part D premiums for Medicare. Okay, so this affects you if you're on Medicare or will be on Medicare in 2 years. And the reason that I say that is because you could be 63 years old and might be thinking about doing a conversion or taking a large IRA withdrawal. You need to keep in mind that if you're going on Medicare at 65, that decision could impact the amount that you're going to have to pay for Medicare. In other words, it might push you into an IRMAA threshold or IRMAA bracket that you might not have been in before. And here's the thing too. You generally can't appeal an IRMAA increase that's caused by a Roth conversion or an IRA withdrawal. Now, there is the SSA Form 44, but it only works for specific life events. It's not for voluntary income decisions. Now, conversions could still make sense, even if it causes you to have to pay more for a year because of IRMAA. So, keep that in mind. Sometimes people think, oh, no, I'm going to hit IRMAA. I definitely shouldn't convert. Maybe you still should, because again, IRMAA is only for 1 year. And it's just one of those things where you just have to factor it in. So if you're going to do a conversion, you need to factor, okay, these are the taxes I'm going to have to pay, but okay, here's also the additional amount that I'm going to pay for IRMAA in 2 years. Because remember that they always look back at your income from 2 years ago to determine how much you're going to have to pay then for Medicare, okay, where you fall income-wise. Another thing to mention here briefly is that I talked about were state taxes. So remember, with state taxes, there's different rules, with Social Security, with pensions, IRA withdrawals, Roth conversions, like as an example, with Social Security, some states don't tax it, some states do. Some states don't have any federal income taxes or any state income tax, I should say. So all these things need to be factored in too. So like as an example, if you plan to move, maybe you're in California and you're thinking about doing a big conversion, but maybe in a couple years or whatever the case, you might be planning to move to Florida or Texas and there's no state tax. So factoring that into your decision as well as to when you should convert, if you should convert. So if we pull this all together, again, we talked about a lot. And this is not meant to be an all-exhaustive list of reasons why you should or should not convert. I can think of others, but there's only so much we can put together in just one video. So hopefully this has been helpful. If we think about all this in a nutshell, just remember that if you do a good Roth conversion and it's a good situation for you, it could help to reduce your lifetime taxes. It could help to flatten those future RMD spikes. It could also lower your IRMAA risk. It could keep your ACA subsidies stable. It could help the surviving spouse and also potentially help your kids and also give you more control over your future income. But again, if you do a poor strategy here, it could raise your taxes unnecessarily. It could trigger IRMAA. It could reduce your ACA credits. It could also cause you to maybe pay tax that you never needed to pay. In the end, Roth conversions really come down to something simple. You want to withdraw the money in the years when it will be taxed the least, whether that's you, your spouse, or your kids. And which years those are, really depends entirely on your situation. And of course, also on any potential legislative changes that happen in the future, maybe to change tax rates. Roth conversions can be one of the most powerful tools in retirement, but they can also be one of the most expensive mistakes. If you'd like help with all this and in building out a sound retirement plan, should you convert? Should you not convert? And if you should convert, how much should you convert? What withdrawal strategy should you use? What should you do about Social Security or ACA and Medicare and all this, and want some help really putting all the pieces of the puzzle together? Then schedule a retirement strategy call with me. There's a link down below in the description. Click on that, learn a little bit more, and schedule a call, and I'll look forward to talking to you soon. Take care. I'll see you in the next video.